Hello YouTube. In this video I'm going to outline normative nihilism or normative error theory. So according to normative nihilism, there are no normative facts, period. There are no normative reasons, period. There are no reasons for action and no reasons for belief. There is nothing you ought to do or ought to believe. Nothing counts in favour of performing any action or holding any belief. There are no values. Nothing is good or bad. Nothing is justified or unjustified. So why take this kind of position seriously? Well, it's worth setting up a bit of the background debate here. So many people are attracted to denying specific kinds of normative facts. In philosophy, moral nihilism or moral error theory is a fairly influential view. So, according to the moral error theorist, there are no moral facts, and so all of our moral judgments are false. I have a video which outlines moral error theory in my series on metaethics, but one of the central motivations for this view is what's known as the queerness argument, which was first stated by J.L. Mackie. This argument has two parts, metaphysical and epistemological. The metaphysical prong is, to quote Mackie, if there were objective moral values, then they would be entities or qualities or relations of a very strange sort, utterly different from anything else in the universe. The point here is that it's hard to see how there's any room for objective moral values given what we know about the way the world is. It's hard to fit objective moral values into a naturalistic, scientific worldview. So, slavery is morally wrong. You ought not to own slaves. But, what is that? What on earth could this wrongness be? So, a standard way to bring out this supposed queerness of moral reasons is to note that moral reasons are categorical. They are binding on us regardless of what our desires and interests are. So some reasons are merely hypothetical. They have force only given particular desires. So let's say it's raining outside. Well, if you want to stay dry, you ought to put on a coat, right? If you want X, you ought to do Y, or if you want X, you have reason to do Y. But obviously, if you have no desire to stay dry, you can release yourself from this imperative, right? If you have no desire to stay dry, then you don't have a reason to put on a coat anymore. By contrast, consider the moral claim that you ought not to own slaves. Well, this is the case, regardless of whether owning slaves would serve your desires. You can't release yourself from the obligation not to own slaves by saying, oh, well, I don't care about the suffering of others, or, I don't care about potential negative consequences, or I'm not going to feel guilty about owning slaves, or whatever. It doesn't matter what you care about or what you feel. Still, you ought not to own slaves, and that's that. The suffering caused by slavery is a reason not to own slaves, even if you personally don't care about suffering. That's arguably how we usually think about about moral commitments. So morality makes categorical demands. Morality gives us reasons that are independent of our own desires and interests. And many people have found this puzzling. Like, how on earth could this work? How could I have a reason for action? How could there be something that's like binding on me, that has authority over me in that kind of way? What in the world could could have that property of giving me a reason for action that's independent of my interests? So this is the metaphysical prong of the queerness argument. The epistemological prong is, again to quote Mackie, if we were aware of objective moral values, it would have to be by some special faculty of moral perception or intuition, utterly different from our ordinary ways of knowing everything else. How do I know that slavery has the property of wrongness? It seems that none of our ordinary ways of learning about things in the world could give us access to these reasons, these values. Sensory perception, introspection, developing and testing explanatory hypotheses, conceptual analysis. None of these seem to reveal wrongness in the world. None of these seem to reveal categorical reasons, reasons for action that are independent of my desires. So the best we can say, at least Mackie thinks, is that, well, we know these moral obligations through some special kind of intuition, but what on earth is that? You know. Okay, so this is the basic idea of the queerness argument. I've discussed this argument at greater length in other videos, as I mentioned. I'll put that in the. I'll link those in the comments. Now, there are plenty of challenges to this argument and different ways of elaborating on this basic idea, but I do think the queerness argument captures something that many people find troubling about the idea that the idea of objective moral facts. So, we might conclude on the basis of this sort of argument that there are no objective moral facts. There is nothing you morally ought to do or morally ought not to do. So that's moral nihilism. Now, a popular response to this argument for moral nihilism is known as the companions in guilt response. Essentially, this proceeds by trying to find other properties that even the moral nihilist accepts, but that have the same supposedly problematic features as moral properties. So if the nihilist believes in some property P, but P is also metaphysically queer in the way that moral properties are metaphysically queer, well then clearly the moral nihilist has no grounds for rejecting moral properties on the basis of the queerness argument. So the companions in guilt argument tries to show that morality is no worse off than other things that the moral nihilist accepts. And in particular, we can appeal to normativity more broadly. So, moral reasons are just one kind of normative reason. There are also other types of reasons for action, and there are also reasons for belief. And if we can show that all normative reasons are in the same boat as morality, well, that puts somebody who wants to just be a moral nihilist in a difficult position. So, broadly speaking, then, there are going to be two reactions to companions in guilt style arguments. The first option is to deny the parity between the moral domain and the companion domain. So you can argue that these domains are not relevantly similar. So only the moral domain is queer. The second option is to embrace the parity, but then endorse nihilism about the companion domain as well. And this is the option that's taken by the global normative nihilist. So suppose there are no moral truths, there are no moral facts, well, we can then urge that the same problem that arises for morality will apply to all normativity. The global normative nihilist basically bites the bullet and just embraces the conclusion of the companions in guilt argument. As far as the normative nihilist is concerned, it's called companions in guilt for a reason. All normativity is guilty, right? So the normative nihilist rejects all normativity, and so this is what we're going to talk about here, right? So this is sort of where we've come from. Okay, so we have some argument for moral nihilism, and then what the normative nihilist will try to argue, following this sort of companions in guilt strategy, is, well, this problem for moral facts, for moral truths, is also going to arise for normative facts, normative truths in general. So it's not just the moral that we should reject, it's normativity in general. There are no normative facts, there are no normative truths, there are no reasons in general. So let's begin with reasons for action. Now, I said that many moral nihilists target categorical reasons that bind us independently of our desires. But they don't usually have a problem with hypothetical reasons. So, it's raining outside and I want to stay dry. So I have a reason to carry an umbrella, right? It's raining outside and I want to stay dry, so I ought to take an umbrella with me. The fact that it is raining and that I desire to stay dry counts in favour of me taking an umbrella. Well, that seems fine, doesn't it? That seems okay. Or, when I'm hungry, I have a reason to eat, right? My hunger gives me a reason to eat, because eating would satisfy the hunger. Or the fact that smoking is bad for your health and that you care about having a nice long life, that's a reason for you to quit smoking. If you want to be healthy, you have a reason to quit smoking. These seem like perfectly ordinary claims about practical reason. When we deliberate about what to do, we find claims such as these almost irresistible. So, according to instrumentalism about practical reason, an agent has a reason to do P just in case P would satisfy one of the agent's desires. So on this view, then, reasons for action are grounded in desires, and this is what hypothetical reasons are, right? Hypothetical imperatives. If you want X, you have reason to do Y. As Mackey puts it, the reason for doing Y is contingent upon the desire for X by way of Y's being a means to X. So it is the desire for X that creates the reason for doing Y. Now, although this is normative, right? We're talking about what you have reason to do, what you ought to do. This is normative. We might think, well, the normativity in this case is okay because it's reducible. It's reducible to ordinary descriptive claims about desires plus means of satisfying those desires. So what it is to have a reason to do Y is just that Y will satisfy one of your desires. And of course, it should be clear from the instrumentalist point of view, it's going to be hard to make sense of moral reasons, because as we noted, moral reasons are supposed to be binding on us regardless of what our desires are. Given an instrumentalist view of reasons, it seems that categorical reasons are simply off the table. So, this is the sort of picture of a kind of that a standard moral nihilist might want to paint, right? They would say, well, hypothetical reasons are reducible to claims about desires and means of satisfying desires. Categorical reasons are not reducible to any ordinary descriptive claims, so categorical reasons are objectionably queer in a way that hypothetical reasons are not. So, this standard moral nihilist would not deny reasons for action in general, only categorical reasons for action. But, we have the companions in guilt argument. So there is an argument that if categorical reasons are queer, then so are hypothetical reasons. So actually, if you want to be a moral nihilist, you should deny both. All right, how does this work? Well, Matthew Bedke, I think I'm pronouncing that right. I may not be. Matthew Bedke, in his article, Might All Normativity Be Queer? He frames this challenge in terms of the structure of reasons. So let's take a moral reason. Let's take, for instance, the vegan's argument that the suffering caused by animal agriculture is a reason to refrain from purchasing meat. Okay, it's morally wrong to support the animal agriculture industry. You have a moral reason to refrain from purchasing meat. Now, of course, you may also have some personal concern for animal welfare. Maybe you have an instrumental reason to refrain from purchasing meat as well. But, regardless of what your desires and interests are, regardless of how much you like meat, regardless of whether or not you care about animals, even so, the suffering caused by animal agriculture is a reason to refrain from purchasing meat. This is a bog standard moral claim. Now, Bedke says we can represent this moral reason as a three-place predicate with the following structure. So we have essentially R, and then in brackets, FAX in C. And so this is to be read, F counts in favour of A's Xing in circumstances C. Okay, that's the structure. F counts in favour of A's Xing in circumstances C. The fact that animal agriculture causes suffering counts in favour of you refraining from eating meat in the relevant circumstances. The circumstances being that you are able to perform certain actions. So you have the ability to refrain from eating meat. There are other healthy diet options available. You wouldn't be sacrificing anything of comparable moral significance by refraining from eating meat. So fill in the sort of general circumstances there, but basically, yeah, the fact that animal agriculture causes suffering counts in favour of you refraining from purchasing meat. Now, the question is, where is the queerness here? Like, what exactly is metaphysically problematic about reasons when we understand them in this sense? And so we can sort of use this structure to identify exactly where the queerness lies. Now, clearly, there's nothing problematic about F. Okay, F, this picks out perfectly naturalistically respectable states of affairs in the world. So F in this case is the causing of suffering by the practices in the animal agriculture industry. Well, animals can suffer, and presumably the way that they're treated in factory farms and so on does indeed cause suffering. Moral anti-realists don't object to that. Similarly, there's nothing problematic about A. A just refers to a particular person, and again, moral anti-realists don't deny that there are people. What about X? Well, this refers to an action. In this case, the action of going vegan, refraining from purchasing meat. Well, it's totally fine. Again, nothing queer about that. And then circumstances C, well, general circumstances, again, perfectly fine. This is just a specification of the general scenario plus the actions available to me. So none of the relator here are metaphysically queer. What's metaphysically queer is the relation itself. It's R. It's the reasons relation. And this seems like the right diagnosis. I mean, what's puzzling to the moral nihilist is the thought that nothing in the world could make it the case that some fact just in itself counts in favor of some action. Right? It's this idea that, of like something of a fact somehow favoring or disfavoring particular courses of action that moral nihilists have a problem with. I mean, I can make sense of a person favoring or disfavoring something. There are things that I like and things that I dislike, but like facts favor, like, so just some fact in the world favoring or disfavoring. I mean, so like the fact that animals suffer under animal agriculture, that fact does not favor or disfavor anything, surely. And even if it did, it's hard to see why that would constitute a reason for me to act in any particular way. So on Bedke's analysis, the target of the moral nihilist's argument should be the relation itself, not any of the relator. But with this in mind, Bedke argues that the queerness argument against moral reasons is going to apply with equal force to hypothetical reasons. So suppose that Verity wants to stay healthy. Quitting smoking will help Verity stay healthy. So we say to her, if you want to stay healthy, you ought to quit smoking. You have a reason to quit smoking. Well, now we can plug this into our model, into our little schema of reasons, all right? So the facts that, number one, Verity wants to remain healthy, and number two, quitting smoking would improve Verity's health, those two facts count in favour of Verity quitting smoking. So F is the conjunction of Verity's desire to stay healthy, plus the fact that smoking is a means of staying healthy. A is Verity. X is quitting smoking, and then C obviously is the available options that are available to Verity, like the fact, well, she can quit smoking. There are other ways of life and so on. So okay, we have exactly the same the same sort of structure here. Okay, we still have this reasons relation that is looking rather odd. So each, the F, the A, the X, the C, they're perfectly fine, but they were perfectly fine in the moral case. But even when it comes to hypothetical reasons, we're still left with this reasons relation. I mean, more generally, as far as instrumentalists are concerned, the only favouring consideration, the only thing that counts as a legitimate F in our model of reasons, is the fact that an action would promote one's desires. But all we've done here is plugged in a different state of the world for F. The relation remains the same. Whether F picks out desires or whether F picks out states of the world that are not desires, if the reasons relation is metaphysically queer in the case of moral reasons, it must be metaphysically queer in the case of hypothetical reasons as well. So it just isn't at all clear how, like my desire for X plus the fact that X is a means to Y, how does that make it the case that I have a reason to do Y, or that I ought to do Y? Like where the hell does that come from? What on earth is that reason? Like how on earth does the desire plus a means of satisfying the desire give me a reason to do anything? I mean, one way that we might try to approach this is to say, well, isn't there a relevant difference between hypothetical reasons and moral reasons, in that we can release ourselves from hypothetical reasons, but not from moral reasons? I mean, this is part of what makes moral reasons puzzling. It's like, what could have that kind of categorical authority over us that I can't release myself from it? But notice that we can release ourselves from hypothetical reasons by changing our desires, right? Hypothetical reasons depend on desires. But in fact, all reasons have a dependency relation like this. Here's an example from Jonas Olson in his book on moral error theory. If I lose my desire to stay dry, my reason to take an umbrella disappears. Right? Fair enough. But similarly, if you take a moral reason, like the claim that the suffering of animals in animal agriculture gives me a reason not to eat meat, well, that reason not to eat meat would disappear if we were able to create meat in a laboratory in ways that would not cause animal suffering. So there's not really a distinction between hypothetical reasons and moral reasons with respect to dependency. They just depend on different things. So yeah, hypothetical reasons depend on desires, but similarly my moral reason not to eat meat depends on the suffering caused by animals. And if you could create meat in different ways, then that moral reason would disappear. Like the mere fact that a reason depends on desire does not make it any less puzzling than if it depends on anything else. So, hypothetical reasons. Right? If you want X, you have reason to do Y. Hypothetical reasons are kind of grounded in desires. The fact that something would satisfy my desire gives me a reason to do it. Moral nihilists are happy with this because desires are metaphysically respectable. They don't deny that there are people with desires, and they think that hypothetical reasons can be reduced to desires. But according to Bedke, all we've done here is shown that the relatum F is metaphysically respectable. This does not resolve the queerness problem, because that problem concerns the relation itself. It concerns R. It doesn't concern any of the relator. So, as Bedke says, even the moralists' candidate considerations expressed by F are metaphysically kosher. The fact that an action causes pain, or that it alleviates pain, are the facts that an action causes pain or that it alleviates pain are no more and no less metaphysically suspect than having a certain present or future end. In all of our examples, the relational nature of reasons and not the candidate relator raise metaphysical questions. So, hypothetical reasons are just as queer, just as puzzling. Now, normative nihilism does have one unfortunate consequence, which is you have no reason whatsoever to join my Patreon and access bonus videos. You have no reason whatsoever to send me money to support the channel. You have no reason whatsoever to take up private tutoring, which we can set up via the email there. You have no reason to join my Discord, and you have no reason to look into the description for links to all of these things. Okay then, so it's important to distinguish normativity from motivation, right? Because this could be a source of confusion regarding what the normative nihilist is saying about hypothetical reasons. I mean, clearly, desires have a kind of motivational force. Our desires tend to push us in particular directions. That's just what a desire is. And there are facts about how best to satisfy one's desires. So just as a matter of like how my psychology works, I will act in such a way as to try to satisfy at least some of my desires. But it's important to notice that this doesn't show that desires have normative force. So yes, I will be motivated to act in accordance with my desires, but this leaves open the question, why is it the case that I ought to do what would satisfy my desires? Right? How is it that my desires give me a reason to do anything? So as Bart Strumer notes in his book Unbelievable Errors, it's easy to conflate claims about practical reason with just straightforward descriptive claims about means-end relationships. So compare these two claims, right? If you want to stay healthy, you have reason to quit smoking. Claim number one. Right? There's claim number two, an effective means of staying healthy is to quit smoking. Right? Quitting smoking just will improve health. Well, claim number two in itself doesn't say anything about, what you ought to do, about what you have reason to do. Claim number two just describes a means-end relationship between two states. And two is only going to entail one if we make the additional assumption that, you ought to take whatever means would promote your ends, right? Whether you ought to take whatever means would promote your ends is exactly what's in question here. So one way to see the point of the companions in guilt argument is to consider alternatives to instrumentalism. So suppose that I desire X. Well, Why isn't that a reason for me not to do X? What's wrong with anti-instrumentalism, which is the view that S has a reason to do P just in case S desires that not P? Or we can consider alternative versions of instrumentalism. So Bedke notes that according to present aim instrumentalism, S has a reason to do P just in case P satisfies S's present desires. Compare this to complete life instrumentalism. S has a reason to do P just in case P would satisfy the maximum number of desires over the course of S's whole life. For the present aim instrumentalist, I might as well just go ahead and gorge on chocolate cake because this satisfies my desires in the present moment. For the complete life instrumentalist, I have reason to be, to moderate myself in the present moment and to be concerned about my life overall, right? And, I have reason to try to promote long-term health. I'm going to be better able to satisfy my future desires if I act with restraint today. So, we can see that it's not that there's just one instrumentalism. There's not just one way that my desires might give me reasons. Indeed, if desires are reason giving, if my desires give me reasons, why don't other people's desires give me reasons? According to the instrumentalist, when I make claims about the reasons that a particular subject has, I can only consider that subject's desires. But why is there this restriction? And if desires in general did give me reasons, then the fact that slavery causes suffering would be a reason for me not to enslave others, where this reason would be independent of my own desires. And of course, that would be just what a moral realist would say. So a moral nihilist who accepts hypothetical reasons needs to give an account of why is it that S's desires give S reasons, but the desires of other people do not give S reasons? What's the relevant difference? I mean, certainly there doesn't seem to be any metaphysical difference here, which, as far as the queerness argument is concerned, is important, right? Like, there's no metaphysical difference between my desires and other people's desires. So, one obvious response to this is what we might call the so what problem. Why is it that other people's desires do not give me reasons? Well, because regardless of what other people's desires are, it seems perfectly intelligible for me to respond, so what? I mean, let's say that I want to enslave people. You point out to me that enslaving people will cause enormous suffering. Well, so what? I don't care about suffering. Now, you may find my attitude repugnant. You may hope to live in a world in which everybody cares about suffering, but look, sociopathy is not incoherent. And my own desires are what actually motivate me. My own desires are what explain my actions. The desires of others are relevant to my behavior only insofar as I care about them. So, when I ask, so if you ask the question, why care about other people's desires? Well, either I already do care about other people's desires, in which case no problem, or if I don't care about other people's desires, the only way you're going to be able to convince me to start caring about other people's desires is by appealing to, what my own desires actually are, right? Like, you have to appeal to my current interests. You have to show that it's in my interest to care about other people's desires. So ultimately, it's motivating me is going to rest on what my desires are. I can always just say to any claim about what other people desire, I can just say, yeah, so what? I don't care about that. But even on this point, we can kind of push this companions in guilt problem. Again, this is noted by Bart Strumer in his book Unbelievable Errors. So let's say that Verity finds herself attracted to doing something that she believes is wrong. She wants to steal candy from the baby. She knows she could get away with it, and she doesn't much care about the baby. Now, let's say, we are instrumentalists about practical reasons, so we say to her, look, it would satisfy your desires to steal candy from the baby, so you have reason to steal candy from the baby. Well, it seems that Verity can perfectly intelligibly respond like this. She can say, yeah, but so what? It's wrong to steal candy from babies, so I'm going to ignore your advice and continue to resist my desires. Like Verity, yeah, she wants to steal the candy, she knows she could get away with it, she doesn't much care about the baby, but she's making a commitment to act in ways that she considers to be morally good, and she thinks that it's morally wrong to steal candy from babies. So she's going to resist her desire to steal the candy. Now, of course, in this case, Verity presumably has some more basic desire to do what she considers to be morally right. But what this makes vivid is that for any desire at all, we are capable of stepping back from that desire and asking ourselves, should I have this desire? Should I endorse this desire? I mean, clearly I can have some desires that in my more reflective moments I refuse to endorse. This is already a perfectly standard part of, deliberating about practical reason. I desire to eat the chocolate cake, but I know that gorging on chocolate cake is bad for my health, so I resist that desire. And when I do this, I'm acting on the more basic desire to live a healthy life. But I can similarly bring that desire into question. I can say, why desire to live a healthy life? Why endorse that desire, right? Why not just live in the present moment? And I mean, I can do this for any desire you select. For any of my desires, it seems I can step back from them and ask, well, should I have this desire? Should I have this desire? So the point is, there doesn't seem to be anything special about desire, like any given desire, that would inhere it with normative force. Desires have motivational force. They will, in fact, like what it is to have a desire is it's something that motivates us in a particular direction. But that doesn't mean that it has normative force. It doesn't say anything about what we have reason to do or what we ought to do. So, I have the desire for X. I recognize that Y is a means of achieving X. Do I therefore have a reason for doing Y? According to the normative nihilist, well, no. This would commit us to properties that are just as queer as those involved in, moral reasons. My desire for X does not give me a reason to do anything. It might well explain why I'm motivated to act in particular ways, but it doesn't give me reasons. For the normative nihilist, there are no reasons for action, period. There are no categorical reasons, but nor are there any hypothetical reasons. There is no morality, and there is no practical reason. There is nothing you ought to do or ought not to do. There is nothing that you have reason to do. Okay, so we have disposed of reasons for action. Let's now turn to reasons for belief. We use normative language in epistemic contexts, right? We say there are things you ought to believe, things you ought not to believe. Given the available evidence, you ought to believe that the Earth is not flat. And of course, you have reasons for belief, right? The behavior of the Foucault pendulum is a reason for believing that the Earth is not flat. The observation of smoke above the forest is a reason for believing that the forest is on fire. Smoke above the forest supports or justifies the belief that the forest is on fire. The normative nihilist denies that there are any reasons for belief. So when we make epistemic claims, like you ought to believe the earth is not flat, or smoke above the forest is a reason to believe the forest is on fire, all of these claims are false. Okay, so let's begin with Bedke's schema for reasons. R bracket F-A-X close bracket in C. Well, in this case, when we're talking about epistemic reasons, F picks out some piece of evidence, A picks out a person, Xing refers to forming a belief or some other epistemic state. So Verity's observation of smoke above the forest is a reason for Verity to believe that the forest is on fire. We've seen that what's metaphysically queer is the reasons relation. Well, this same reasons relation obtains in the case of reasons for belief. If the reasons relation is queer in the moral case, it's queer in the epistemic case too. Moreover, many philosophers take it that epistemic reasons are categorical. They're not reducible to hypothetical reasons. Epistemic reasons hold independently of your desires. You have reason to reject flat earth theory. That's independent of any of your desires or goals. The behavior of Foucault's pendulum is a reason to believe that flat earth theory is false. Whether you like this or not, whether or not it serves any of your interests. The observation of smoke above the forest is a reason to believe the forest is on fire. Again, regardless of any of your interests. Suppose that Verity is in a relationship with Sydney, and Verity discovers romantic messages between Sydney and another woman. Well, Verity now has reason to believe that Sydney is unfaithful. And maybe this belief doesn't serve Verity's interests. She's heavily invested in the relationship. She would prefer to believe that Sydney is faithful. Knowing that Sydney is unfaithful only brings her suffering. Well, that sucks for her, but, you know, she still has reason to believe that Sydney is unfaithful. In general, there's no guarantee that, you know, what we have reason to believe is going to serve our desires and goals. So, we can kind of, so given that epistemic reasons are categorical, we can put this argument to the moral nihilist. Premise one, there are no categorical reasons. Premise two, if there are no categorical reasons, there are no epistemic reasons for belief. So there are no epistemic reasons for belief. Now, of course, one obvious strategy to this appeal to categorical reasons is to try to reduce epistemic reasons for belief to desires. So you might say that observing smoke above the forest only gives me a reason to believe that the forest is on fire if I have a desire for true beliefs. As it happens, of course, we do in fact desire true beliefs. When we engage in inquiry, there's a sort of presupposition that we're trying to maximize true beliefs and minimize false ones. So the fact that smoke is indicative of fire gives me a reason to believe that there is a fire. So, of course, what we're doing here is reducing reasons for belief to hypothetical reasons. We're reducing reasons for belief to reasons of the form, if you want X, you have reason to do Y, right? If you want true beliefs, you have reason to believe that the forest is on fire, given the observation of smoke. But we've already seen that hypothetical reasons fit Bedke's schema as well, and so are targets of the queerness argument. So the normative nihilist concludes there are no reasons for belief either. Now, it is important to be clear about what's being claimed here. There are no reasons for belief. Now, the claim that there are no reasons for belief does not entail, at least not obvious, it doesn't obviously entail that there are no truths or falsehoods, nor does it entail that there is no evidence in a broader sense of that term. So, smoke above the forest is, in a broad sense, evidence that the forest is on fire, in the sense that smoke indicates fire. So, you know, generally you only get smoke where there's fire, and fire tends to cause smoke. We can understand this in terms of the causal relations, or indeed just correlations between fire and smoke, right? Given the correlation between fire and smoke, the observation of smoke indicates fire. This is sometimes called indicator evidence. So far, there's nothing normative here. There's just correlations or causal relations between things. Now, I mean, this is not being proposed as an analysis of the concept of evidence in general. The concept, you know, evidence may well be a normative concept, but this is just a specific, you know, a specific kind of evidence, as it were, that seems to be non-normative. So, anyway, the key point for the normative nihilist is that so far none of this is enough to secure normative reasons for belief. There is indicator evidence. There's an indicator that the forest is on fire, in the sense that smoke is correlated with fire, or something along those lines. But that doesn't in itself constitute a reason to believe the forest is on fire, unless I additionally have a reason to believe the truths. And indeed, suppose we add that I desire to believe the truth. Well, again, this doesn't constitute a reason to believe the forest is on fire, unless we make the additional assumption that I have reason to fulfill my own desires. In any case, as Bart Struman noted previously about hypothetical reasons, it's easy to conflate claims about epistemic reasons with claims about indicator evidence. So, claim number one, there is reason to believe the forest is on fire. That's a normative claim about what we have reason to believe. That shouldn't be conflated with claim number two, which is just smoke above the forest indicates that the forest is on fire. The second claim will only entail the first if we make the additional assumption that we have reason to believe, we have reason to try to maximize true beliefs and minimize false ones, right? We have reason to try to form beliefs that are indicated by the evidence to be true. So, there are no reasons for belief. The fact that P is true, the fact that I have evidence that P is true, that's not a reason to believe that P. There's no obligation to hold true beliefs rather than false ones. Now, one standard objection to normative nihilism is that it is self-defeating. If normative nihilism is true, there are no reasons for belief. So there are no reasons for believing normative nihilism. As a normative nihilist, I cannot consistently think that any argument for normative nihilism gives me a reason for believing normative nihilism. I can't think that any of my arguments are compelling. If I'm a normative nihilist, I must think that my own stance is not justified. And I must grant that there's nothing I can say to my opponent that would give her a reason to change her mind. So I've discussed these sorts of self-defeat arguments in other videos. I'll link that in the comments. So in this context, though, here's a quick response. This is given by Jonas Olson in his book on moral error theory. Olson points out that although the normative nihilist cannot consistently think that she has any reasons for belief, she can still give arguments to the effect that normative nihilism is true. She need not claim that any of these arguments are reasons to believe normative nihilism. What we're interested in when we discuss, metaethics and meta-epistemology and these other normative domains, what we're interested in is, what are the facts? What are the truths? The arguments concerning normative nihilism bear on this and this alone. Now, additionally, of course, just as a matter of fact, many people do aim to have true beliefs, and, since normative nihilism is true, believing normative nihilism would satisfy this aim to have true beliefs. Now, of course, the fact that it satisfies this aim is not any kind of reason in favour of it, as we have discussed. But in any case, the point is, it's not self-defeating to say that a position is true, but also that there is no reason to believe it. It's not self-defeating, but it does, you might think, sound rather strange. It sounds rather paradoxical, right? The normative nihilist is committed to these seemingly paradoxical propositions. Propositions like, normative nihilism is true, but I have no reason to believe it. Or, flat earth theory is true, but there is no reason... Wait, no. Flat earth theory is false, but there is no reason to believe it. Of course it would be, you might say, well, from a normative nihilist point of view, just as good to say that flat earth theory is true. That's wrong, but so what? The fact that it's wrong is no reason not to believe it. So, yeah, flat earth theory is false, but there's no reason to believe that it's false. So, indeed, the normative nihilist must affirm propositions like this for everything that she believes. Okay, maybe this isn't to say that normative nihilism is self-defeating, right? It's like these propositions can consistently be affirmed, but it does seem a very counterintuitive consequence. Consider again something like the observation of smoke above the forest. On seeing the smoke, I form the belief the forest is on fire. And a normative nihilist will say, additionally, there is no reason to believe the forest is on fire. Seeing the smoke does not give you a reason to believe the forest is on fire. But, we still want to draw a distinction between a case like this and a case of someone whose beliefs really are just based on faith. So consider somebody who says, I know that God exists, but there's no reason to believe it, right? I believe in God based on faith. I take a leap of faith and believe in God, right? Well, surely there's a distinction between these cases. Surely when I see the smoke above the forest, and then on that basis, I form the belief the forest is on fire, something different is going on to the case of someone who, takes a leap of faith and believes in God. But the worry is that there is a distinction here. But normative nihilism collapses this distinction. The normative nihilist cannot capture the distinction between these two cases, because as far as the normative nihilist is concerned, there's no reason to believe the forest is on fire. There's no reason to believe God exists. In both cases, these are beliefs without reasons. So I think here the normative nihilist can say, well, there are still ways of sort of recapturing something like this distinction in terms of indicator evidence. Smoke above the forest indicates the forest is on fire. How do I know this? Well, through my observations of the correlations between smoke and fire. When people say they believe in God on the basis of faith, what they're saying is that there are no such observations. There's no other type of indicator either that supports their belief in God. Or there's no other type of indicator that on which their belief in God is based that has caused them to form the belief in God. Now, in neither case is there a reason to believe, but there's still, one might think, there is still a distinction here that matters to us, right? Like in some cases, I sort of base my beliefs, I form beliefs as a result of seeing kind of correlations between things or causal connections or maybe logical arguments or whatever. And in cases like the person who believes in God on the basis of faith, well, I'm not appealing to they're not appealing to such things. Additionally, we should keep in mind the relationship between indicators and reasons. So suppose we accept epistemic normativity and we say that the smoke above the forest is a reason to believe the forest is on fire. Surely what makes the smoke above the forest bear this normative relation to the belief is it's because the smoke above the forest indicates the forest is on fire. It's not as though the reason for belief somehow floats free of these correlations and causal relationships, right? Like you have the fact that smoke is correlated with fire, and that's why, from the epistemic realist point of view, that's why the observation of the smoke gives you a reason to believe the forest is on fire. But then the normative nihilist can ask, well, what work really is the normative reason doing? Why isn't it enough to say, look, the smoke indicates fire, and that's why I believe that the forest is on fire, and that's that, and just leave it at that? Okay, so that was a brief summary of normative nihilism and why we might take normative nihilism seriously. So I think a final question here is, if it's the case that both hypothetical reasons and epistemic reasons are subject to the same queerness argument in the same way that moral reasons are, why is the queerness of hypothetical and epistemic reasons not obvious, right? Like, why do we find moral nihilism more plausible than normative nihilism, right? Like, what? So, I mean, it's true, right? Like, there are many people who find the queerness argument appealing in the case of moral reasons, but it's not so appealing when it comes to hypothetical or epistemic reasons, or at least maybe they get on board with it eventually, but it takes a longer time for that to happen. So why is this? Why is there this difference? Well, here's a suggestion. Let's start with hypothetical reasons. Hypothetical reasons are based on desires, but desires, as we've already noted, they already have a kind of motivational force, right? They have a sort of practical oomph built into them. I mean, it's kind of hard to even imagine somebody acting in ways that are completely contrary to their own desires. That might not even be coherent, right? It's just like the way, just what it is to have a desire is, people will generally be motivated to act in accordance with it. So what that means is that in ordinary circumstances, a question such as, well, why should I act in accordance with my desires? That question just doesn't really arise because we all I just will act in accordance with my desires, and that's that, right? Like in ordinary circumstances, we kind of just recognize that people just act in accordance with their desires. So we never really have to ask ourselves like, well, why should I act in accordance with my desires? Why do those things that are an effective means to satisfying my own desires? Now take belief. Well, arguably belief in a sense sort of aims at truth, right? Belief, that may well be why the capacity for belief evolved in the first place. Organisms need to represent their environments with a reasonable degree of accuracy in certain respects. In any case, there's a very close connection between belief and truth. Indeed, arguably, to believe a proposition just is to take that proposition to be true. It would certainly sound very strange to say, X isn't true, but I believe X, or X is true, but I don't believe X. I mean, when I take something to be true, that just is believing it. So this is why, the case of somebody who believes, say, that the Earth is flat just because they want to, or the person who doesn't care about truth. That seems so bizarre. Like it seems so bizarre for someone to say, "Oh yeah, it's false that the Earth is flat, but I still believe it." Right? I mean, so practically speaking, then, an argument to the effect that a proposition is true is an argument for believing the proposition. When I present an argument for the truth of the proposition, I am essentially presenting an argument for why I believe that proposition. I'm presenting, in a sense, an explanation for why I believe that proposition. Moreover, I can't reduce the force of this argument merely by changing my desires. I might not desire to believe the conclusion, but as long as I'm convinced that the argument establishes the truth of the conclusion, I just will believe it. So we can't help but be motivated by our judgments of truth and falsehood, in much the same way that we can't help but be motivated by our own desires. Right? When we make a judgment of truth or falsehood, that just will lead to changes in our beliefs. So again, in ordinary circumstances, a question like why believe the truths, why conform our beliefs to indicator evidence, these questions just don't arise. Like, I just will do that. Compare this to the case of categorical reasons for action, moral reasons for action. Well, action doesn't in itself aim to be, other regarding. Action can be entirely self regarding. Like, nothing in the nature of action in itself makes it so that actions aim to be moral. Indeed, people often act immorally. They often act in ways that they themselves take to be immoral. People have weakness of the will and so on. So basically, the comparison here is, to believe that P just is to take P to be true. But to do X is not just to take X to be moral. It is not just to take X to be in the interests of others. So in ordinary circumstances, a question such as, why should I do what's moral? Why should I care about other people's desires, about other people's interests? These questions do arise very easily and very frequently in ordinary circumstances. And so this issue of the normative force of moral facts becomes salient. Because you can't say, well, I just will do what moral. Like, in the way that we generally sort of take it for granted that, like, I just will act in accordance with my desires. Well, it's not the case that I just will do what I believe to be moral, or that I just will care about other people's desires. So yeah, like, in ordinary circumstances, I just am motivated by my desires. I just am motivated by judgments of truth and falsehood. So it doesn't really matter whether I ought to be motivated by these things, whether these things really give me a reason to do or to think anything. By comparison, in ordinary circumstances, I may not be strongly motivated by moral considerations, and even if I am, I will be aware of other people who are not motivated by moral considerations. And so this makes brutally salient, right, the question, why should I do what's moral? Why should I be motivated by these things? Why do I have a reason to do what's moral? And maybe that makes the queerness problem more salient in the case of moral reasons than in these other cases. But that's just a suggestion about what the difference may be. That may be, that's not part of normative nihilism, but that's just one suggestion for why. It's the queerness problem has struck people more powerfully in the case of moral reasons rather than hypothetical and epistemic reasons. But the normative nihilist will say, well, actually, no, if the queerness problem holds for moral reasons, it holds for these other reasons as well. And that is the end of that video. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.